Hi everybody, it's Miss Mizzy, and today we're going to be talking about decimals. And we're not going to be doing any operations with decimals right now. We're just going to be talking about place value and kind of understanding really what decimals are all about. Your new vocab word for today is expanded form, and we're going to get to that term in a little bit. But prior to talking about that term, let's kind of roll it back a little bit. We know that decimals exist. We know that the decimal point exists. And we know that decimals and fractions actually go hand in hand with each other. They look very different than each other, but we can transfer a decimal to a fraction and then back again. We won't do that today. We're just talking about the basics of decimals. So the first thing I'm going to show you are three things. And these should be very familiar to you. These are not usually orange when you first use them back in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. These are base 10 blocks. Now this here is what we call a flat, a rod, and a unit. Now the flat here we know encompasses 100 units. So this is a flat, aka 100. This is a representation of 100 because we actually have 100 units in this big large piece here. I'm going to take this away and we're going to get smaller. The next thing here is a rod. We have 10 units that encompass this rod. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Probably haven't heard the term base 10 in a while, only because you probably haven't worked with these blocks in a very long time. By all means, you can look these types of pieces up online, print them out so that you can have them to use while you're manipulating if you want to. If you're still having trouble with addition and subtraction of whole numbers, these are great tools to use. Let's come on back. That's a rod and it represents 10. We live in a base 10 society. So what if I were to take this one whole? Remember, this unit means the number 1. And what if I were to take it and represent it in something that looks like this? Now, what might be a little bit confusing to you is this unit is now this entire square. But what did I do with that entire square here? So I'm going to take that away, and now we're going to use this as our 1 unit. I separated my 1 unit into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 even smaller pieces. I separated my 1 unit into tenths. Now in this case, I have 3 of the 10 pieces shaded. This is called a decimal square. Again, go online if you're having trouble with decimals and trying to understand what the idea behind decimals are. You can print these off, color them yourself. You can make your own set. They're pretty fantastic. But for right now, we're going to just start out with these tenths here. I have 3 of these shaded in. Therefore, the representation of this actual decimal that is shaded here is 3 tenths. We write this in the way of 0 wholes and 3 tenths. This version might look a little foreign to you. We're going to get back to that in just a little bit. Now let's compare this piece here to another decimal square. Now let's take a look at this decimal square. I know this really doesn't show up, but this color here is green. And this square is the same size as this square. So again, let's assume that the larger square is just 1 unit. Now, how many pieces has this unit been chunked up into? They're all pretty even looking squares inside of the square. Well, let's look. I know that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 columns by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rows. So that is 100. Guys, these are called hundredths. So this decimal square is broken up into hundredths. Now, how many little squares are shaded? Let's take a really close look. We have 3 columns by 10 rows. We know that 30 of the little hundredths are shaded. We can write this in words as 30 hundredths, or in decimal form, 0.30. Now, it's pretty interesting how the ends of my words are ending in THS. That's that sound that you hear when I'm saying tenths, hundredth. So when you're trying to compare 10 pieces of pie to a tenth of a piece of pie, those are huge numbers that you're talking about here. That's a huge difference. We've got 10 pieces of pie, and then we've got just a little sliver, just a tenth of a piece of pie. So when you're at a party, make sure you enunciate those THS or leave out the THS completely. But when you're in the classroom, that THS sound is very, very important. This card is divided into thousandths. So you notice that I emphasized the THS sound at the very, very end. Now let's kind of look and see how much is actually shaded. I know that originally this entire column, the first column, if we're really talking about specifics here, was set up in a column of 10 here in the hundredths. So if this is originally 10 squares, and each of those squares have been divided into 10, then what's 10 times 10? That means that just in this first column alone are 100 pieces that are shaded. So we've got 100 here, 100 in the next column, 100 in the next column. We don't quite have 100 in the last column. So let's count again. 100, 200, 300, and 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. 350 little pieces. So we can write that in words, 350 thousandths, or 0.350. Now, some of you guys that are a little bit more advanced at this, you will probably be saying at this point, oh, Miss Mizzy, why are you writing the 0 at the end? That's completely unnecessary. As of right now, we're going to keep it in because I want you guys to understand really what's going on in these decimals, and that ending 0 can be eliminated later. In my opinion, it's not terrible to keep it there when we add and subtract, sometimes using 0 as a placeholder or just kind of like a guide is very beneficial for some cases. Now, I'm not going to lie. Seeing things like this in a visual format is very confusing to some learners. So if you just watched the previous part of the video and thought to yourself, wow, I thought I knew decimals, but I guess not because this does not make sense to me one bit. Do not worry about this. This is just one way to teach decimals. Right now, we're going to start talking about place values of decimals. So it's sometimes hard to even figure out the concept of numbers that go all the way to infinity, because infinity isn't a number, it's a concept that numbers go on and forever and they're limitless. So even if we just take the number, 1 million, and to a degree, that's actually a small number in retrospect. Well, 1 million is 1,000 1,000s. So if we just take that and consider, oh my gosh, all these people, if we gather up 1 million people, that's crazy. You cannot fathom trying to gather 1 million people in one area and even possibly being able to see what 1 million looks like, let alone gathering 1 million things maybe that you own or you just collect over the years. 1 million is a huge number. But what about numbers that are less than 1? And we're not talking about negative numbers here. We're talking about those fractions and decimals. We're talking about the parts of that 1. If we were to take this number 1 and cut it up ever so slightly and talk about one little piece of that 1, well, that's also a hard concept to understand as well. So let's start out with the place value of decimals. I'm going to use hundreds, tens, and ones as well to get us kind of back and familiar with place value already. And I really enjoy color coding these types of scenarios because it makes my brain think of the place values as separate entities, and then I can see everything all in one so that it brings everything together. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to pick a color, and I know that my largest number is going to be in the hundreds place just for right now. You can obviously start off at larger numbers, but we're just going to keep ourselves in the hundreds place for right now. So I'm going to write this vertically, hundreds, switch my color, tens go here, and then of course we have our ones. So for something like the number 526, my number 5 would start in the hundreds place. I have 2 tens, so 526. Now here comes that lovely decimal point. And this decimal point I'm going to make nice and large so that we know when we come to this decimal point, we're going to pause, say the word and then move on. A huge thing about decimals is actually being able to say the numbers out loud. That's a huge thing to be able to do. So make sure you practice that as well as writing them out. So we talked about the number just next to the decimal here, and I'm going to bring our notes out from before. We talked about the first place value being tenths. Now make sure you've got that THS on the end of 10, or else it's going to look just like tens. Tenths was represented in this piece here when we took our unit square and we divided the unit square into 10 pieces. Here we've got 3 of those 10 pieces shaded, so this represents 3 tenths. Let's move on. Let's go back to our notes. Our next place value, when we cut up those tens, we turn everything into hundredths. 30 pieces shaded, and we called that 30 hundredths. So that is our next place value. I'll do that in a darker green. Hundredths. And then last but not least, you saw this on my note sheet. The last one is thousandths. And that was when our unit square was cut up into 1,000 pieces. And if you don't believe me, go right ahead and log on, print one of those out, count them out. So now we didn't talk about the next two place values, but I do want to go over them right now. Now, if we were talking in retrospect of ones, tens, hundreds, we know that the next place value is thousands, then 10,000s, then 100,000s, then millions. So if we look at that and look back here at our place values, we have tenths, hundredths, thousands. What do you think the next place value would be? Of course, it's 10 thousandths. And then the last one that we're going to talk about today is going to be 100,000. So now that we've gotten that taken care of, you're probably wondering, oh my gosh, Miss Mizzy, how can I write that all the time and write that on every single one of my homework sheets and every single piece of notes that I have, because I just can't remember this? Do yourself a favor. Write this once. You can laminate it. You can put it in a special folder. You can put it somewhere safe so that you always have it. And when you go ahead and use your homework as studying or are actually doing your homework, you can pull this out and match everything up while you're writing your decimals. You can also use this when you're trying to say your decimals out loud. So what I've got here is a different version of the place values. These were written in a vertical fashion, originally this way, and then I just turned my paper this way so that I would be able to take possibly another piece of paper or work on this piece of paper at this time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example number. We're going to start off very easily. I'm going to put my ones digit here, line up my decimal, and finish out my number here. Now I have two decimal places, also known as my decimal place goes out 2 spaces. So right here, I would write this out as 4 and 35 hundredths. How did I come up with 4 and 35 hundredths? Well, luckily, when we learn about the decimal point, that is the only time in the history of numbers that you are allowed to say the word and. Lots of misconceptions are that when you say very large numbers without decimals, such as 462, it's common to say 462. Well, if you were to say that, that would mean that there was a decimal somewhere in there. And of course, in the number 462, there is no decimal. But when we talk about this number here, 4.35, we're talking about 4 ones, 3 tenths, and 5 hundredths. But the fantastic thing about this is that we do not have to say the entire place value name with each number that we're talking about. So the great thing is that we can say our number prior to the decimal, which in this case is just 4. Our decimal lets us say and. Then we say the number that comes right after the decimal. This is 35. Let's check out where our last number in our decimal ends up? Our 5. It ends up in the hundredths section. Therefore, we then say 35 hundredths. Altogether, it is 4 35 hundredths. If you were to write this out in words, this would be an acceptable answer. Again, 4 35 hundredths. So the term that I talked about at the very beginning of this video, expanded form, is a sum that shows the place and value of each digit of a number. So we know that the word sum means an answer to an addition problem. So let's put that in our notes. We're going to be thinking of addition. And then also the word digit just means the symbols that we use for our numbers. So we're going to be thinking of 1, 2, 3, and so on. So those we can kind of think, all right, well, it's an addition problem with the digits of the number we're talking about, and it shows the place value. So the original notes that we were working with, the ones in pink, are going to come in handy this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these off to the side so that we can refer to them. So when it comes to expanded form, I wrote down the first number that we are allowed to write down, and that is 4. What's great about 4 is that 4 is 4. When we talk about 4 as a number, we're talking about 4 ones. So right now we can write down the number 4. That's a digit. Now, since we're talking about the sum of all of the digits and their place and value in the number, let's add our next number. So of course, our next number is 3. Is it 3? What is this number after the decimal point? Well, what place value is this 3 in? It is in the tens place. So how do we write 3/10? Well, fancy that. We actually have that on our notes. Exactly put. Here we have tenths. We talked about 3/10, and we wrote 3/10. In this case, we have to have a 0 prior to the decimal place because in this case, we have no whole numbers to worry about here. So 0, and 0 is a number, 0 is going to be appropriately sitting right beside that decimal point. So the way that we write 3/10 is 0.3. Now let's look at the 5 in our original number. This number is 5 hundredths. We're ignoring everything else and we're looking at the place value of the 5 only. How do we write 5 hundredths? Well, first we're going to add this number to the whole number, and then we're going to start out with our 0 since there are no whole numbers. But in the actual number, 5 hundredths, are there any tenths? No, there are no tenths. Therefore, in the tenths place, we put a 0. How many numbers are in the hundredths place? Well, the number is 5 hundredths, so that should kind of give us an idea. Of course, we're going to put 5. If we were to add all of these up, 4 plus 3/10 plus 5 hundredths, we would get our original number of 4 30. So a real-world example of this number, 4 35 hundredths, would be something like $4.35. And that's probably the cost of one bag of popcorn at the movie theater. I know, pretty expensive. So now that we talked a little bit about expanded form, let's do another example of actually saying a number and putting it into an expanded form. I'm going to make it a little bit more challenging. We're going to go start at the hundreds, and we're going to go all the way out to the thousands place. And I'm going to keep 4 and 35 hundredths up so that we have something to refer back to. So my number is going to be 623 and 156 thousandths. So you're probably wondering, oh, Miss Mizzy, how on earth did you know how to say that automatically? Well, I had some fantastic references to go by here. And again, don't be afraid to keep this out when you're doing your homework or you're studying for a test or quiz. Now, the first thing that I know is this number, because first and second grade told me how to say this number over and over again. The number is 623. Now I've got something different going on here on the right side of my number. I've got a decimal point. Now that decimal point tells me that I can say the word and. That's my big cue here. I can say the word and. So I've got 623 and now what I like to do is I like to look at the last half here. What number is this? This is 156, and it's absolutely appropriate to say 156, but you have to end this sentence with the appropriate place value. What's the very last place value here? We're stretching all the way out to the thousandths. Therefore, the appropriate way to say this last part of this number is 156 thousandths. Let's try the whole thing again. 623 and 156 thousandths. We're talking very small numbers here. Let's see if you can quiz yourself here. What number is in the tenths place? The answer is 1. 1 is in the tenths place. What number is in the thousandths place? The answer is 6. 6 is in the thousandths place. What number is in the hundreds place? This 6 is in the hundreds place. So quizzing yourself like that is also a great way to figure out place value, and it'll help you memorize the order in which the place value actually comes right after the decimal point. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to put this number in expanded form. Now remember, expanded form is a sum that shows the place and value of each digit of a number. So we're going to create an addition sentence, and we're going to use each digit in its actual place value. So here we've got 623. Let's kind of chunk this number up with the numbers prior to the decimal point and then after the decimal point. So first, let's worry about 623. 623. How many hundreds are here? 6. How do we write 600? Easy. 600. Let's add that, now that we're done with our 6, let's add that to our next digit. Our next digit is 2. 2 is in the tens spot. 2 tens. 10, 20. Oh, that 2 means 20. So we're going to add 600 plus 20, and then let's move on to our next digit. We've got 3. Oh, that's the easy one. That's in the ones place. Well, of course, we're going to add a plain old 3. Now we've got our decimal point here. Our decimal point we don't have to add because it's not a number. So let's just concentrate now on the last half of our number, 156 thousandths. So now that I've kind of said that one again. Let's look at the next digit. Our next digit is 1. What place value is the 1 in? It's in the tens place. Well, how would I have to write 1/10? Well, if we look back at our notes here, the tens place is right after the decimal point. So, of course, if I have 1/10, I'm going to write 0.1. Don't forget to add that up because we are doing expanded form here. Now, this is where, to me, I think it gets a little bit tricky. Now we've got a 5 and a 6. Let's work on the 5. The 5 is in the hundredths place. So the hundredths place, well, in the hundredths place, we're just talking about 5 hundredths. That means we don't have anything in the tens place. So 0 needs to be the hero and go in the tens place. But we do have 5 hundredths. Fantastic, let's move on. Now we've got our last number here, which is the 6. This 6 means 6 thousandths. This is going to be a tricky one here. Of course, we don't have any whole numbers, don't have any tens, don't have any hundredths. We're just left with 6 thousandths, itty bitty little pieces. That's where our 6 goes. So I will have videos for this is how you would write 623 and 156 thousandths in expanded form. If you're still unsure about how to expand your decimals like this, check out other videos by looking and searching on the internet for expanding decimals to the nearest hundredths place, thousandths place, 10,000ths place, and kind of challenge yourself.